Welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about a book I read recently called Confederacy of Dunces. For those of you who haven't read it, I'm not going to be spoiling any of the plot, although it's not a very plot-heavy book to begin with, but I'm going to be trying to make a case for why you should read it if you haven't read it, and if you have read it, then I hope that you'll enjoy hearing my thoughts about it. The book was written in 1980, but the main character, Ignatius Reilly, seems like he's so familiar to me, and I'm sure he's familiar to anybody who spends any time talking on internet forums or comment sections of news articles or videos or anywhere where you have to interact with strangers online. You find people who are like Ignatius Reilly, and I sort of thought that sort of personality was a product of modern times. Ignatius is about 30 years old in the book, and he's living with his mother. He has no job, he's very obese, and he has a disgusting lifestyle. He has a very messy room, and it often describes his disgusting habits and his very odd way of dressing. He's quite an intelligent person. He spends most of his time writing what would in modern times be a blog, but in the book, written in the 70s, he's just writing on what he calls tablets, although I don't know what that means, but he's just writing down his thoughts. He's disgusted with modern society, and he just writes these rambling essays that he dreams about making into some kind of master work that'll be published at some point in his life, but it's just completely disorganized. He lives in utter degenerate chaos. He's completely dependent on his mother, who is also an alcoholic, and although you might feel sorry for her from the description, it's kind of hard to feel sorry for her because she enables his behaviour, and she's not a particularly virtuous or intelligent person herself. Maybe this doesn't sound like a comedy, but I promise it is. The plot of the book is very simple. I won't go into it here, but it basically documents a series of jobs that Ignatius gets, a series of events that leads him to various methods of employment and some misadventures that he comes across. But really, I think the plot is just a sort of coat hanger for the real meat of the novel, which is sort of a character study, not just of Ignatius, although he's the main character and there's a lot of time spent on him, but there's also other characters. It's sort of like a Dostoevsky novel in the sense that there's some very troubled characters that are all interacting with each other, and they've got these sort of neuroses about them, and they're all facing different struggles. These characters who have not much bearing on Ignatius's life end up being these extremely well-drawn, colourful, troubled characters who are really interesting just to read about and to read their interactions with each other. The thing about the main character, Ignatius, which I find so interesting and kind of very sad at the same time, is that the thing that makes him funny is also kind of depressing when you consider the real people who are living Ignatius's life, is the fact that he's not stupid. He's actually quite smart in terms of just general intelligence. He's well read. He's familiar with sort of classic works of philosophy, and yet he's completely useless. He can't take care of himself. He can't hold down a job. He cannot maintain any relationships with anyone in his life. He's just completely worthless in a sense to society. And the lengths that he goes to in the book to avoid taking on any responsibility or doing any work is what is part of the humour of the book, is the fact that he works so hard on these manuscripts that he writes, all this nonsense that he writes, and yet he cannot apply himself to anything that is actually useful to society. It's humorous in the way that it's written, but in the way that I see it played out in real life, it's not funny. It's sad. It's sad that there are real people living in the world who are like Ignatius. These people I see all the time online who are angry, pathetic, lonely people who have quite a high intelligence, is what these people who think of themselves as misunderstood geniuses like Ignatius. It reminds me of something Jordan Peterson said about the comic book guy from The Simpsons, who's also a fat character.
Guy, right? I mean, he completely useless in every possible dimension with an IQ of about 160, and it's very annoying to people who have an IQ of 160 that they can also be completely useless, but it happens a lot.
When someone's smart and they feel like they're smart, they feel like that should be useful to somebody, and yet it's not. And even though Ignatius is undeniably a bad person, he's extremely obnoxious, you still can't help but sort of be on his side when you're reading it. I don't know if it's just by virtue of the fact that he's the protagonist of the book and the book is told from his point of view, you feel somewhat sympathetic to his position and you end up wishing for him to succeed. But I also think that there is something to sympathise in him. You'd get the sense that the fact that he is this way is a product of his environment and not under his control. It feels like he could be a good person if he just applied himself a little bit, or if the opportunity came up, you feel like he could amount to something. Perhaps if his mother stopped enabling his slothful lifestyle, he might actually make something of himself. There are no good people in the world of A Confederacy of Dunces. Everyone in the book, all of the characters who are described, are at best merely incompetent, and at worst incompetent, narcissistic, and obnoxious. Is pretty much describes most of the characters in the book. They're not worthy of praise in any way. There's nobody in the book who Ignatius can look up to. There's no one who is willing to help him. So in a way, just in that setting, Ignatius ends up being a more sympathetic character because everyone is awful, and the awfulness of the world is, it rubs off on him. You kind of feel like the awfulness of Ignatius is just a reflection of the world that he lives in. The way that he's so critical of everything around him, it seems justified. The fact that he's disgusted by everything he sees and calls it an abortion or a miscarriage, and he calls everyone he meets a mongoloid, he's actually not wrong. There's nothing beautiful or honourable in that world, and it's kind of not surprising that he's struggling to find any meaning in his life or anything to aspire to when everything around him is just terrible. If I'm making this book sound sad, it's because I think there is something intrinsically sad about the book, and it might be because the author committed suicide, which I hope that you read if you pick up this book, I hope it has the foreword in it that is written by the man who helped get the book published after the suicide of the author. He tells the story of how the author, John Kennedy O'Toole, committed suicide, and his mother brought his manuscript of A Confederacy of Dunces around to anyone she could find to read it. But she knew that it was a good book, and she went around and pestered everybody she could find to read it and to get it published. And to think that this book, which is so good and that a lot of people have really enjoyed, the author of the book never even knew that book was read by anyone other than his mother. He never knew that it got published, let alone that it was widely loved. But aside from all of that, the sad parts of the book, there's nothing. The book isn't written in a sad way. There's a few moments of perhaps a little sentimentality, but mostly it is just a comedy. I don't know if you could call it a satire, but it's a comedic novel, and it is very funny. And that's most of the enjoyment I got out of it was the comedy. And I don't read funny books enough. I usually don't read comedy, but I'm really glad that I did in this case. So if you want a few laughs and you haven't read it before, then I really suggest reading it. And if you have read it, then please share your favourite moments in the comments section. I think one of life's greatest pleasures is to share comedy with others. Keep those valves open and clear, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you for watching.